So Neil, I know you're in digital marketing and you've had a lot of success in generating passive, almost automated income, and you help others do the same. But for our audience who may be unfamiliar with you, what are you up to today, and why should we listen to you?
Yeah, so in simple terms, Voltage, the company you mentioned, we launch and we grow. We make profitable e-commerce brands, predominantly focused, starting with the Amazon FBA channel. We also acquire and exit those brands when they mature, and so that's one of the things Voltage is primarily working on. It's part of a holdings company that also has multiple divisions, our own businesses in e-com space, both on and off Amazon, as well as another division, a solar trailer division, where we're deploying 12 prototype trailers into the marketplace that are 5 kilowatt on-demand power stations. They can be put anywhere in the field, anywhere in the world. So those are some of the things that we're working on right now.
Okay, so our listener who's out there listening to you, ultimately, what are they going to get out of this episode? Before we dive into your backstory, what's
Sure.
the value add here?
Well, I mean, as we were talking about a little bit in the green room, before we had our technical issues, because I live in the country, we got about 45 acres out here, and one of the squirrels must have died, so the internet went down. So I'm operating this on my phone at the moment. We'll see how long this goes. Is to learn, that I was given an opportunity, my personal testimony, through a number of things that to this point in life have been major challenges, major issues, maybe things people are extremely afraid of. I've had to walk through that, both personally, financially, professionally, and so because of that, it's given me a great opportunity to speak on a variety of topics of personal experience in all of those areas. And so maybe today, one of you listening to this might be in adversity with a family. You might be going through divorce, been there. You might be looking at bankruptcy or the financial concerns that faced in your business or personal life because of decisions. I've been there as well. And you might be facing health or wellness concerns with family, personal friends, wives, husbands, etc. And I've been there as well and had to overcome that adversity with my family. And those are all topics of great importance to me, and maybe for some of you today as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's not great that you've had to deal with all that, but
Right.
unfortunately, you've checked the all three of the primary boxes that I tend to find with my show, that the kind of major pain points in people's lives tend to fall into one or more of those three categories. So
They come in threes.
they come in threes. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully, you can stick with the abundance path for the foreseeable
It's been
future.
quiet for a while now. Yes. We're
That's
going to
good.
knock on wood. I have something on here. It's been quiet.
Yeah. There you go. Nice.
Yeah.
So let's jump back and you can start wherever you'd like with maybe the first. We're going to dive into one of those three a little bit more in depth than all three, but if you could kind of just hit on those three as far as what you've had to deal with from a financial, health, and relationship adversity standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the relationship one, because you're young and you make dumb decisions and you do things in life that beget the question. If you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell yourself now? Sure. I would literally, and this is going to sound really odd, but I would tell myself, don't change a darn thing, because you're going to love how this turns out. But the guy that was in that period in storm would probably think very differently if he heard me say that, because he was dealing with personal relationship issues. He found a girl at 19. By the time they were 20, he was 22. They got married and then divorced by 28. So the issue in relationship to that was just growth and maturity. I lived in a very conservative family, which is cool because I'm now a conservative family. However, their boundaries were probably a lot more strict than mine. And so when I had the opportunity to leave to go to college, I kind of let loose a little too far to find myself, to go out a little too wide, a little too far, and eventually kind of settled back in to something a little more conservative. But in that place, the arrogance and pride and the goal and drive and ambition that I had personally given to me, ingrained, is just something that was very misplaced in maturity at a young age. And because of that, I took less time and interest in the people around me. And one of them was my wife. And because of that suffered greatly. And the self pride and arrogance and things that were powering that ego kind of left her behind, to the point where she eventually stepped out of the marriage and was seeing other men on the internet and traveling around the country to visit them when I was traveling, and I didn't know that was occurring. And so that was a pretty heartbreaking situation that took a long time to kind of reconcile and realize my place in that, my issue, my concern, what was my fault and what I did wrong as a husband or a person that led to those things. And really some time to really think through that and adjust my thinking considerably. And because of that adversity, it's led me into a deeper relationship with folks around me in life now. I value them very differently. It's the second pillar of my life fundamentals. That's fun, people, and profit. We can unpack that a little bit. But the value of that I see very differently now through that experience that I needed to have in order to get me past that point.
Yeah, that's sorry you had to go through that. I do
I'm not.
appreciate, I mean, well, on some level, I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like you've recognized your ownership of it. You've taken ownership of your role in all of that, it sounds like. And
Yeah,
which
there's
is,
no victim here, right? I'm responsible
yeah,
for what I did in my place
sure.
in that dance, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that can be liberating for sure, but easier said than done to get there mentally.
It
But
can be. It can be. You got to forgive yourself. That was the biggest thing and the longest thing.
mhm,
It took me it was the hardest path.
mhm,
Once I had forgiven her for the things she did, I had to
mhm,
reconcile the things I did, and I had to forgive myself
mhm,
for the way I was and the things I did to her and what allowed her to become that person that she became
sure.
because of the way I treated the relationship. And
Yeah.
at the end of that was the hardest part to reconcile.
Got it. No, I appreciate you sharing. I know it's not, it sounds like you're in a healthy place,
Absolutely.
perspective
Yeah,
wise,
we're way
but
past that now. That once upon a
absolutely.
time, that was a very tearful conversation, but that's
Sure.
long past.
All right. Well, we'll see if we can get you to cry on some of those. No,
If you're not
I'm kidding.
crying, you're not buying. Isn't that the phrase in
No, I'm
marketing?
kidding. That's right. Okay, so that was 28. I think you said is when the divorce actually occurred, and then
Hmm.
walk us through the next few years. How did things pan out for you after that?
Well, I mean, I was still a bit on that destructive path. I hadn't got to that reconciliation point yet that I was just telling you about. So my pride and
Yeah.
arrogance were still leading me around quite a bit. And because of that, I kept pushing and pushing for new things and new things. And I met a wonderful girl in that process, very level-headed girl, a very different girl than the one that I had married previously, a better fit. They say opposites attract, right? It turns out my first wife and I were too much like each other, and that created an enormous amount of conflict. My wife Katie and I are very different people now, and 17 years later, that makes for a very good relationship. But at the end, it was a continued path of self-destruction that led to relationships that drew people towards me who were destructive. They say you can attract, right? And what is attraction,
Sure.
marketing, or attraction? Well, if you're spewing negativity out in the world, you're going to find negative people. If you're acting bad in the world, you're typically going to get in line with bad people. It seems like common sense, yet so much of the time we look around and watch people do this, right?
Well, it's easier to see in others than it is in ourselves, I think.
Well, we're
Sometimes.
blinded, right? Our cognitive dissonance is kicked in, and we don't want to see
Sure.
that. We don't want to accept it. We don't want to believe it's true. And because of that, we're just going to keep operating in that space that we feel most
Yep.
comfortable in. And change is
Sure.
hard. Okay. So I didn't want to change. I knew that was there, and I just wanted to bust past it. And I thought the best way to do that was just keep forcing forward in business. And because of that, I could not see certain things people were doing around me. I didn't want to see them and wouldn't acknowledge them. And one day I had got myself kind of very far into a business transaction with a couple guys that seemed like a very great opportunity. And there's patents in it. And it was this really cool startup. And we invested a lot of time, energy, and money into that. It became a little too leveraged. I walked in one day and discovered the books weren't exactly the way they were. Why am I not getting paid? Well, that sort of answers that question. Where's the money been going? I don't know if I want to know the answer to this. And the end result was a strategic business bankruptcy that basically collapsed our financial situation in order to protect us from that, but also just to get out from underneath the problem we created. It was a very difficult decision. I like to own what I make mistakes on. And I did make a plan to reconcile that. I just had, by the grace of God, standing with my pregnant wife at the bottom of Tulsa City Hall. It was the City Hall or where it was. We were down there, and it was just a situation that was just like you could imagine, like Joel versus the volcano. I forgot that the other day, but he's living like in the basement, and the lights are of him, and they're blink. It looked just like that, just all gray and fluorescent. And I'm like, man, this sucks. And we go into this room, okay, and we're having to own this decision. And just like a few weeks prior, the company showed up to repossess the car at like 10 o'clock at night, and my pregnant wife is standing there crying as they take the minivan away with everything in it, like kids, car seats, toys, not the kids, excuse me, kids, car seats.
Right.
Don't use commas. Be careful. Commas kill.
That's
So
an important apostrophe there.
it's an important apostrophe there. It's like, yeah, you gotta be
Kids,
careful.
car seats.
We're eating grandma or eating grandma.
Right. Let's eat grandma.
The kids were not in the car seats. But that was the thing that led to the next steps, which was having to go in and actually face the bankruptcy judge and go through that process. And I remember going through these double gray doors and more fluorescent, and it just opened up into this room. And there was just a table, and every table had a judge, and every judge was dealing with the bankruptcy, and they were running us in waves. And it's like, I've never seen, like, you think you're going to go from a judge in a courtroom and this is some sort of Hollywood thing.
Sure,
no, you're going into a room with a bunch of guys and gals sitting there who are determining the fate of whatever comes out of that financial situation. And by the grace of God, this gentleman who took a look at our situation, saw the backstory for a moment, and the summary, recognized that while we had been a little bit of a victim, we had victimized ourselves in that process, but he took mercy on us and he wiped our debt out. So he gave us an opportunity to reset. start
Okay.
brand new at that point, and gave us a little bit of hope and opportunity that if we changed things and got on the right path, we were just given a big gift of opportunity. He didn't have to do that, but in a swipe of a pen, he took care of it and said, you see, you got a plan and you're willing to take care of this, but I'm going to get, here's my pregnant wife and I sitting there dealing with this. And he's like, you just, whoop, here's your goal. Don't mess this up. This is your chance.
So just so what type of, I have just a couple questions, because I mean, getting into partnerships is a pretty critical piece, and I've dealt with partnerships that some have gone south as well. So first off, on the business side, any lessons you could throw out there for the listener as far as how to pick the proper
Absolutely.
partner?
Part of the reason why that was easy for him to swipe the pin in that instance was that the debt was actually in the LLC that we had formed.
Okay.
So the LLC protection had a general liability insurance policy on it as well. So don't do business in the public world unless you're doing it in and beyond an LLC, and make sure you have general liability insurance for that LLC. The LLC should own the other businesses that you're involved in, and there should be a business that owns a business. If you do that, then you're basically helping to protect your assets from the separate asset they may be doing business in the world by combining those assets. Example, my partner's LLC owns his 50% in Voltage, and my enterprise owns 50% in his LLC, and together that LLC does business in the world. So just these things were learned in how to protect and indemnify yourself, do business the right way, build a chart of accounts, and be very accountable to your best business practices. Get a CPA, go into the weeds and do the financial things and look at the negative, like Good to Great says with Jim Collins. You got to pull that rock up and you got to look at those nasty things underneath it. Even as hard as it is, take that power and look at it. And until that point, I wasn't willing to look at some of the financial problems that we were getting ourselves into, and I could have maybe turned it around sooner if I would have been a little stronger in that.
Gotcha. How about as far as even picking that partner in the first place? Any lessons there?
Well, greed is a very powerful emotion. Sure. And I sort of bought into the idea that this was going to be $1 billion company. Now, later on, as I would get past all of that and go into the world and see the other aspects of that business being replicated through major corporations, I did realize that that was a tremendous opportunity. However, it was squandered by weak minds. Weak minds in the business. I ended up being a victim of a weak mind. I created a weak mind in myself, but the other gentleman, I was not smart enough, savvy enough, and I was not willing to ask the kind of questions that would have finally led me to understand their mindsets. They were not as strong as they presented themselves. So the answer to that was time. Time is an ally. Okay. Time can, be an ally in the intent of waiting longer to determine and see the reactions of an individual, the way they do things, and give it enough time. So that you have a very comfortable understanding of what they're doing, right? Time can also be a detriment to you because you may need that time to gain something, and you can't necessarily wait the 12 or 24 months it might take you to evaluate that relationship, because you might need money now, or you might need the business now. So time can also be a weapon, can also be bad in that sense as well. If you are, again, time can be an ally to determining whether or not those people are sincere. You look around them for a while, do your diligence, and determine whether or not they truly have a consistent pattern of behavior across multiple points. And then, trust and verify, right? And those were things I was not willing to do because greed got in my mind. And I just said, I can't miss this opportunity. It's so big, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be this great big next thing and yada, yada. And, people look at you and roll their eyes, right?
Okay. No, that's really good. Those are some really good lessons you've pulled out. I mean, there's always going to be risk. You can't mitigate every
risk.